Hi guys, JT here, Access Health and Fitness, episode 4 of Off the Cuff Talk. I'm continuing on with motivation, I suppose, is the idea at the end of all this. But in the last episode, I talked to you about my own mental health problems, and you know, I took you through a lot of the story anyway, of how I got to went from competing as an amateur and semi-professional athlete to then attempting suicide. I left off then in changing things around and getting better, and then in January 13th 2009, so only weeks after I felt like things have changed, I got hit with a bombshell. So what happened was, at the time my daughter was only 3. It was about 2 weeks before she would have been 4, her 4th birthday. And I remember being in the house, and we were getting ready to go over to my parents. And my daughter was born with a head of hair. She always had long hair. We were always doing stuff with it. I was always doing stuff with it. And but she wanted 10 plaits put in her hair, or braids, whatever way you call them. I don't know. But 10 of the weavy things put in her hair. But so I remember myself and my wife and all, we were on the bed and we were doing this and we were going through it all. But so we had gotten ready, we got in the car. At the time we had 2 dogs. They were thrown into the back of the car with her as well. And they were on the floor. And then we'd only left the house, I say, 3-4 minutes. And one of my dogs at the time he had a problem with his voice box. And he could never really bark. He always had this, and he never had a proper bark at all. But so we're driving around the corner and I hear this noise coming from the back, and initially I thought it was my daughter was just taking the piss out of the dog, But as I turned around, her head was back and she was in a full seizure. Now, as a paramedic, you're always, or part of our protocol is that, it's under the age of what is it? I think it's something like under the age of whatever, and over the age of whatever, a seizure is presumed cardiac arrest until proven otherwise, So straight away, I was kind of going, cardiac arrest is where heart and all stops. So straight away, I just pulled in, whipped my daughter out of the back seat. She had gone into a seizure, but then had gone limp. But then she was still all cyanide, she was still all blue. She wasn't breathing. I'm trying to stimulate her, And I remember my wife was on the phone on 999. She's shouting down my badge number. She was. I ended up starting doing a little bit of CPR on my daughter, not knowing. Obviously adrenaline was going. I'm looking for a pulse. Can't find a pulse. She's still blue. She's still not breathing. Doing CPR on people is normal for me. Doing CPR on your own daughter is a completely different story. But she. So after a while though, she did come back around, and it was it was just a seizure, what people would consider a typical epileptic seizure, but at the time it was just you shot yourself. But so anyway, we got her to the hospital, and they always say, rule of thumb is, this is good for parents if you're listening, is they always give, between the ages of 1 to 8, they always allow a kid to have a seizure. Every kid gets a seizure free of charge, and the reason is because things like febrile convulsions and all. Febrile convulsion is where a kid is sick and their temperature rapidly increased to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's like a reset button to go into a seizure, and so it's only on the second time around, if you end up back a second time around, that they'll actually start investigating these things. So it wasn't long. It was only a few weeks after, or a couple of weeks towards around her birthday, where she actually had another seizure then. And then there was times where we picked up things like absent seizures. Absent seizures is where it's the lights are on but no one's home. And then this is all going on in March. We had a consultancy with a pediatric neurologist. Then we're told just all the to's and fro's and what could be caused. And at the time and all, I remember, because my uncle had said it to me about it, we had asked about a connection between celiac disease and epilepsy. And the simple reason, because in my father's family there was a lot of history there with celiac disease between aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins' children, and there was a whole heap of them. And even with myself, in the last video I talked about nutrition and all, and gluten, and it was only back in 2008 where I realized that, you know, I had some form of intolerance to gluten, because every time I eat gluten, you know, I just get, you know, bloated, constipated, lethargic. So anyway, so we had asked about that, but that was all. No, that was grand. So my daughter was started on medication. In starting on medication, you know, you can see things change. Now, up to this point, my daughter was very intelligent baby, very intelligent child. Like at the age of 2, she was already pretty much having full conversations with people. You know, I used to have a lot of time. We used to play around games and all. We'd have a lot of, you know, she was great with numbers, not just, you know, counting, but understanding counting. Like if I said to her, get us 73 marbles, she'd count out 73 marbles, you know. And this was before the age of 3. She would have been able to do this. She used to count in Irish, she used to count in French. And these were all just things that we just played with. We kept her stimulated, and she was very bright. But straight away, when she was started on anti-epileptical medications, then you could see the deterioration. Then you could see her, you know, concentration lapsing, you know, and definitely started putting on some weight. Totally just changed the child. Then in June 2009, she was put on another drug, and you know, this was what's known as a sodium channel blocker drug. But she she started to have a lot more seizures, you know, and it got to the point where she was having like 50-60 seizures a day, which is a crazy amount. Like when you see your child, like, you know, having these seizures, and there's nothing you can do. And you know, this is part of where my motivation comes from, because you know, as a father, you feel so helpless. Like, you know, you feel so useless, because you know, your little girl is having these problems. But yeah, so 50-60 seizures a day. She's, you know, she was put on another drug over the summer then, and then she started having these clusters. So clusters is where, like, you know, she'd have a seizure, like a full seizure, 10 minutes later she'd have a seizure, 15 minutes later, 12 minutes later, 20 minutes later, and this would go on and on. And you know, we had got drugs at home at the time to give her, but you know, it wasn't bringing her out of seizures or anything. So you know, during the summer then, you know, as medications get chopped and changed, I remember like the 2nd of September, you know, definitely by far, like people say, like, you know, oh, tell us, like, a bad day, you know, 2nd of September 2009, probably the worst day in my life. And you know, we were getting her ready for school, because she'd only started in primary school, and she was at the desk, or she was at the table, she was eating some breakfast, and I noticed she had an absent seizure. I was talking to her, and then, you know, same thing, lights are on but no one's home. And then she went into a full, like, what's known as a tonic-clonic seizure. So then, you know, 12 minutes later, another seizure. 12 minutes later, another seizure. So that was school going out the way now. And then she, you know, this went on all morning. This was about 20 seizures in or so, and we had given her Medaz, like a drug we had at home, to try and stop it. And the seizures just weren't stopping. So we got on to the hospital. You know, they were like, okay, bring her in. So we brought her in. You know, she's having more seizures still. Then they couldn't stop the seizures, so they were giving her like IV drugs, you know, IV lorazepam and all, where, you know, and the seizures just weren't stopping at all. So I'm in the hospital with her, and she in that evening then we you know, we were put in isolation, because they didn't know if she's after having a virus or a bug or whatever was wrong. So she was in an isolated room. I was then with her. You know, a doctor came down late at night, maybe 8 o'clock or so, kind of introduced herself, you know, said, like, you know, she was a doctor on call, but basically she didn't really want me bothering her. Like, she was like, oh, she'll probably have seizures, you know. But the trouble at this stage was these seizures had started off again, and, you know, full seizure, 12 minutes. Now, my little girl is only like 4 or 8 years of age, and, you know, throughout the day now, at this stage, she's had, I don't know how many seizures already. So at this point then, I'm starting to actually write down the seizures and recording them on my phone. And the nurse that evening was very helpful. She'd done a lot for me. But so about 12 o'clock then, the nurse called the doctor on call. She was like, listen, this little girl is, you know, she's still having seizures every 10 to 12 minutes. And the doctor was like, oh, is she coming out of seizures? And the nurse was like, yeah. And the doctor was like, oh, she'll be grand. So she didn't even come down to see her, you know. And at the time, I'm getting tired. Like, you know, I've gone on through this all day, and I'm exhausted. About, you know, 4 in the morning, the nurse, calls the on-call doctor. Back at this stage, my daughter isn't waking up. She's wetting herself. She's just this vegetative state in the bed, And the doctor on call was just like, "Oh, is the seizure stopping?" And she's like, "Yeah, but every few minutes she's back into another seizure." And the doctor was like, "Oh, she'll be grand." So at this stage, I remember lying in the bed, and I'm holding me little girl, and you're thinking talking about feeling useless and worthless, because as any of our fathers, you're meant to be, your daughter Superman, and to feel so helpless, in the last video I talked about being suicidal, but that was all my own shit. Whereas this is now someone else has a problem, and you can't help it. And even now, it's still so raw all the time, and it's good. I like this. I like feeling the rawness, because it reminds me of what we've been through. But so I'm holding her at this stage. I'm crying in the bed, and she's just having seizure after seizure, and nothing's changing. From about 8 a.m. till 11:30 a.m. I remember the neurology team were paged 8 times, and eventually they came down at 11:30. Gave her an IV drug, and that was it. She was stopped. And I was so tired. I was so exhausted at the time. I didn't do a whole lot that day. But then it was after that day, then I realized, my daughter was one of these people that you hear of all the time that, it just slipped through the net. No one was really that concerned for her, But I've gone from having this little genius child, to now having this, kid of a vegetable state, who can't dress herself. She can't go to school. She's having seizures all the time, and the hospitals are kind of just happy to send her home. And after how I felt, being so useless, it was kind of my own, driving force. Then it was well, this is my purpose now, to go forward and investigate this and do whatever I have to do then. So at that stage, I remember, I probably slept for the day after that. And then after that, it was just I was such a thorn in people's sides. I was investigating stuff. I was reading research on stuff. I was looking for, tests to be done, genetic tests. And, there was a genetic test I wanted done, and they didn't get it done for 4 months. After 4 months, and the results came back, then it came back that it was actually a positive. And the positive thing was that she had a mutation on an SCN1A, which is to do with sodium channels. And it was that most epileptic people, SCN1A mutations are common, but most epileptics shouldn't be put on sodium channel blockers, which are about half of anti-epileptical drugs are, because it can actually increase seizure activity. So this was one of the things, this is another thing I lost my head with. So in November 2009, so we're still in the same year, we were at this stage, my daughter, she was in and out of hospital regularly, and she could be in for 3, 4, 5 days, simply because they couldn't control seizures, and then eventually it would stop. And no one could understand. Doctors couldn't understand, the neurologists couldn't understand why this was happening. So in November then, she was put back on a drug, phenytoin, which is a sodium channel blocker. And I actually raised the question, going listen, why would she put on this when the Tegretol, the other drug, was triggering these 50 to 60 seizures a day? This is a similar kind of family of drug. Would this not do the same? No, she'd be grand. Within 2 days she was back up having 50, 60 seizures a day. So she was taken off it straight away, and you just had to do more. So we started looking at, right, well, what's the alternatives? Because they have a list of 20 odd drugs. And it's basically just, let's try A, B, C, let's try A, C, D, let's try E, F, and G together, and they're mixing and matching, just trying to find a cocktail. But there's no cure. It's not like anyone was ever looking for a cure. No one was ever looking for, how did a healthy child, at nearly 4 years of age, just start having these seizures and all. No one was looking at this. It was basically just we want to stop the seizures, send her home, and once you're not in here, then you're not our problem, kind of thing. So I wasn't happy with that. So we started looking into things, and the first thing that we said we'll do is we'll look at the diet, and we went back and what my uncle had said and what we had brought back up in previous April was, about gluten in the diet. So we said, okay, we'll look at gluten, and it's at this stage my daughter had never gone 2 days without a seizure. So after 2 days being gluten-free, she was also seizure-free. Went on to 3 days, 4 days. So we went 1 week. On Monday, it was Monday the 1st of December 2009, we gave her like a plate of pasta for dinner, white pasta, and she had like 4 seizures that night. Then we went another week gluten-free, stayed seizure-free. The following Monday, the 8th of December, she had 4 slices of bread over the course of the day, white bread over the course of the day, and she had 1 seizure that night. That was the 8th of December 2009, and that was, she's been gluten-free and seizure-free since. So we had brought this up at the hospital and all, and she everything was obviously ignored, coincidence, and no one wanted to take responsibility, and it even got to the stage where they wouldn't take her off drugs. I end up having, I won't say this publicly what I end up having to do, but we'll say myself, I weaned her off drugs until about April of 2010. So from the 14th of April 2010, she was off all medication as well. So it's and stayed seizure free, but stayed seizure free through the diet. But I'm not going to go down the whole story with the hospital and all, because the main point of this was the feeling on the 2nd of December, that uselessness, the worthlessness, that's something that you can say it's a negative thing, but it has been a driving force then for so much. My daughter is fine now. My daughter's 15 years of age. She's a pain in the arse some days. She won't clean her room, but she's otherwise she's grand. She's healthy, she's fit, she's good at sports, she's good in school. Even the school thing, like overnight when she came off medications and all, it was like someone had just put the pause button on for a year, and then we just pressed play again, and she just picked up where she left off, and it was crazy. But it was I had the drive. The drive was that feeling of uselessness and worthlessness, and knowing that it's not even knowing what to do. I didn't know what to do. I'm not a fucking doctor. As a I am a proxy paramedic, but as a paramedic, when I say proxy, I don't mean bad. It's just an Irish term. But as a paramedic, I didn't know what to do, but I had to do something, and this goes for a lot of you. When you combine my 2 stories from post-traumatic stress and then my daughter's story, a lot of the time is, we need the kick in the hole. For me, the 2 kicks in the hole was being at the lowest point of about to hang myself, and the 2nd of September, like being curled up with my daughter, happy to swap places in an instant, but those 2 kicks in the holes, have driven me on to do so much more, which we'll talk about in the next video. But it's to try and find and realize that it's the driving force can be anything you want. When you talk about what's your why, what's your motivation, what's your reason for getting out of bed in the morning, you have to have something. So the goal is the end result, but what's actually going to drive you there? Like, what's the reason to get you there? And that's what I'll talk about in the next video, is how we can learn from these things, and then how we apply it to today's life and move forward with it. Thanks for listening anyway. I'm going to put in one more video. This is kind of a 3-part video, motivation, and I'll do one more video to try and wrap it all up. Thanks again.